I read 27 BookTubers' favourite books of 2022, so you don't have to, except you're probably going to want to because quite a few of them are rather good. I know a lot of BookTubers do this video every year, but I'm telling you, this is the big one. Nobody's doing 27 books. This is the Texas of reading BookTubers' favourite books. Actually, I'm from Australia. Texas is kind of tiny. It's kind of cute. This is the Western Australia of reading BookTubers' favourite books video. Also, legit, I watch the best BookTubers. This is how it works. I'm going to show you the BookTuber. I'm going to tell you why they're awesome, why you will love their content, and then I'm going to pick whichever book from their best of video that I am the most attracted to. If that BookTuber named 50 books, I've got 50 to pick from. If they named one, I've got to pick that one. I'm not picking a single book that I have already read. I am only picking fiction. I just think that fiction is more subjective. I really value what reviewers say about non-fiction, but I really value whether reviewers enjoy fiction. Even with this many BookTubers, I had to cut quite hard. I had a preliminary list of over 50 BookTubers I wanted to include, which probably explains why I'm always so behind on BookTube. If your name is not here, it doesn't mean that I don't love your channel. You could subscribe to all of these wonderful BookTubers here, but please make sure you're going to engage with their channel because engagement helps channels grow. I'm going to start with the BookTuber with the least subs and work my way up to the BookTuber with the most, Veronica. Veronica reads a lot of African books and she just reads very globally, very diversely, which is just a happy spot for me. I love trying books from cultures that I am unfamiliar with. Out of all the BookTubers here, I don't think anybody adds more books to my TBR than Veronica. She is always introducing me to something new and something interesting. If you're on a book buying ban, avoid her channel at all costs. How High We Go in the Dark, that doesn't really represent the style of book I usually get because of Veronica's recommendation. However, a lot of her books have been very hard to track down. They've been expensive, and currently I'm a poor student and that money could be better spent on 2-minute noodles. No, seriously, I'm studying and there's a budget, so if it's not already on my shelf, on Scribd or at the library, I am skipping it. Jess from Stalking Kafka makes really fun, chaotic videos, and I'm really surprised she hasn't blown up yet because she's funny. She doesn't take herself seriously at all, and she's a very clever cookie. She's an intelligent booktuber and an intelligent baked good. Stalking Kafka, that channel name probably gives you a little bit of an idea of her taste, although I've never actually seen Jess read or discuss Kafka. She reads lots of classics, lots of backlist novels, with a generous serving of new release books too. There's literary fiction, gothic fiction, horror, Daphne du Maurier, Octavia Butler, Stephen King, the Russians, Victorian classics. You get the idea. Jess described this book as a trans coming-of-age novel set in 1990s Moscow with punk rock. Yes. Katie's Shelf Life. Katie is new to BookTube around the start of this year and she's absolutely killing it. 200 subs in a little over 6 weeks. Wow, she's clearly doing something right. It's probably the amazing content she's producing. She likes books about art and women. She likes introspective, thoughtful pieces that focus on relationships, life, and art. She really likes art. Katie's favorite artist is Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro. Wait. I think I've got the wrong communist there. Frida Kahlo. Same initials, less murder, probably better at running a country. Actually, those initials are only the same if you're incredibly bad at spelling. Katie makes these wonderful reading vlogs. I know this is going to sound stupid, but they're primarily about reading and books. She uses these short snippets of her week as short transition between the book chat. They're quick, there's lots of them. It's a really efficient way of communicating her week and leaving us with plenty of book chatter. It's just perfect. Booking with Deborah has recommended Black Mumba Boy. Deborah is trying to read a book from every country around the world, and I just love that challenge. As a result, she is reading a lot of historical fiction. I just love learning about historical events and how they affect everyday people, and that's what Deborah's books recommendations often bring. She's also embarking on a journey to read a few more classics, and I love the balance that brings to her bookish raps. She's from Scotland and Yorkshire, which I think we can all agree is a brilliant combination. I've read a Nadifa Mohamed before, The Fortune Men, when it was on the Booker's shortlist a little while ago, and that was a book I didn't really enjoy until suddenly partway through it just clicked, and then I ended up really enjoying that book. So we'll see what happens. Jennifer Loves Books has recommended Animal by Lisa Taddeo. Jennifer's videos are edited by her wife, which is just so cute, and as a fellow content creator, I think that is possibly the most earnest and generous expression of love I have ever seen. Editing can be tedious. You have no idea how many words I just cannot say while filming. Jennifer's wife wins the award for best wife or girlfriend on this list. Except for my wife Nell, obviously, who in no way has threatened me with divorce or thumbscrews if I don't include that caveat. She legitimately didn't, I'm not being funny. Jennifer also loves historical fiction, thrillers, The Woman's Prize, and she DNFs like a champion. She is the only booktuber I know who DNFs more than me. I've previously read Three Women. I thought it was a great depiction of vulnerable women trying to figure out their sexuality while also being exploited by the men in their life. But whoever thought that that was a non-fiction book should get fired. So this sounds along very similar lines, but actually fiction. Angie's book Chatter, The Anomaly. Angie's one of the first booktubers I made friends with, and she is still one of my favourites. In her bio, she described her reading as fiction and non-fiction, but she does actually read very diversely. Ange is great at highlighting books from Northern England and Scotland, and she loves working class fiction and representation. Because she's employed by the government, Comrade Ange cannot express her political opinions. Ange is the booktuber who introduced me to Jessica Andrews, and she is literally always continuously reading Shuggie Bain. She makes these cozy, chill out, chatty videos and has just a wicked sense of humour. Anne Novella recommends check out 19. Anne is a booktuber from Belgium. She likes literary fiction, gothic fiction, and translated fiction. She often reads books that are a bit off the beaten path. But she reads so many books, she often ventures back onto the beaten path and away from it, then around it, then upside down it, and she creates her own path and does her own thing. She's a book fiend. Anne can be a very emotional communicator, which makes her a joy to watch when a book makes her feel something. It just gives so much depth to her reviews. Anne called Check Out 19 a love story to literature, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I kind of like books. Say Kevy, Light from Uncommon Stars is the book she recommends. I love Kevy. She is funny, silly, and knows the value of her amazing laugh. Kevy's booktube channel is half books, half drag, and her drag leaves me both gooped and gagged. I don't think anybody is doing booktube quite like Kevy. She reads these amazing pieces of poetry, and let me tell you, she is an actress. She really captures the emotion of the work. She also pours Coca-Cola down herself in search of humour, and sometimes she even makes raps. Kevy loves a good murder mystery. She loves horror, poetry by black women, and miserable pieces of literary fiction she can inappropriately laugh at. Painful Death is Kevy's happy spot. She knows everything there is to know about trans literature, and she co-hosts the Discworld Readathon last year, and I definitely think that funny, silly fantasy is a genre that suits her tastes. This book involves a demon alien lesbian romance, a donut shop, a trans violinist who may or may not be about to have her soul stolen, and found family. And now I'm pretty sure that if an alien and a demon got together, their genitals would be so different to what we're used to. The idea of straight or queer is just completely absurd. I'm just saying, you know? Heather, soggy expat book nerd. The 5 Wounds. Heather makes these vlogs that are just so light-hearted, funny, silly. She is gifted with the ability to rant about anything in an absolutely hilarious way, but in a way where she's also clearly right. And when she talks about something she loves, she is equally hilarious and compelling. She's basically just a naturally funny person. Heather's channel is not a channel you go so much to for the book recommendations, but for the joy of listening to her talk about books. Her book love just makes me happy. Her book hate also makes me happy, and it makes me feel seen. She also has a hilarious and precocious daughter, Arwen, who often steals the show. If you're unfamiliar with Heather's channel, I recommend flicking through her Vlogmas videos and witnessing the solemnity she treats the elf on the shelf concept with. If I could pick a booktuber whose life should be made into a low-stakes, low-plot BBC sitcom, it would be Heather. And that's not a compliment I give out lightly. Gem of books, Magma. If you like a book that is going to take your soul and rip it into a million pieces, then put those pieces in a cardboard box and hand that back to you with a note saying you can keep the deposit, then Gemma is your lady. She's also very silly, enjoys fantasy, historical fiction, the woman's prize, dogs, and taking the piss. Gemma is the sort of booktuber who, when you announce a Q&A video, thinks, yes, this is an opportunity to ask you about bookish toilet paper. I've picked the book that sounded the most horrible from Gemma's best of video, because we're both fans of Thomas Hardy. Fraser Simon at Springboard Thoughts. At certain points we touch. When Fraser and I agree on a book, we really agree. When we disagree on a book, we really disagree. As a result, I've picked a book about a trans woman looking back at a toxic man she dated prior to transitioning, because that is clearly a Scott book. And if it comes with a Fraser seal of approval, gold. Fraser reads more books than anybody on this list, than any booktuber I follow, around 600 a year. He is a book reading beast. Fraser likes literary fiction, science fiction, fantasy, graphic novels, non-fiction, crime, but when you're reading as many books as Fraser does, is there really a genre that you miss out on? He gives very thoughtful reviews, and he does these great videos with another wonderful booktuber, Shelley, and their interaction really just allows Fraser to showcase his silly side, and he is clearly a very silly man. It's just so great to watch those videos. Kieran Reader, Train Dreams. Kieran is one of the smartest booktubers on this list. She reads a lot of shorter books, a lot of novellas, a lot of translated and backlist books too. She reads both Booker Prizes. She seems to like literary but minimalist books that are very effective at painting a picture of a setting, relationship and or character. She does a lot of vlogs, a lot of standalone book reviews, and I'm not really sure if she just has an eye for a good shot or if she's lucky enough to live somewhere absolutely gorgeous. But her vlogs, wow. I suspect Kieran will blow up at some point soon. Her channel is fantastic in so many different ways, aesthetically pleasing, very intelligent, and she's really funny. Jack from Spread Book Joy and Lonesome Dove. I think everything you need to know about Jack is in that channel name, Spread Book Joy. She honestly loves all books, not just her favourite genres. If you've watched Jack, she clearly enjoys rambling about books. And I really just enjoy listening to where her brain takes the conversation. It's not the most direct route to where she's going, but it's a scenic route. It's really enjoyable and it's just fantastic vibes. Lonesome Dove was the only book Jack named in her best books of 2022. Josh's Bookish Voyage, Another Country. The closest thing I have to another Australian on this list. Josh recently moved to Perth, Western Australia. Suck it, Texas. Josh reads dystopian, fantasy, sci-fi, horror, Afrofuturism, classics, mostly black classics, and non-fiction books about science and racism. He makes vlogs, issues or discussions, and lists. Josh's recommendations are capable of getting me to pick up books that are much, much riskier than James Baldwin novels. But then again, he basically said, read the Baldwin, and there's a Baldwin there. Jen the Librarian, Carol or The Price of Salt. Formerly Jen's LGBTQ reads, but rebranded because she also likes Thomas Hardy and other classics. I think you can see that Jen usually has very, very interesting taste in books. Let me assure you that she also has excellent taste in books. Until Jen recommended Carol, I didn't know that it was also called The Price of Salt. I thought they were two different books. So Jen has the honour of getting me to cross two books off my TBR. Winning Charlotte Coney reads. I love Charlotte's taste in non-fiction. She was a history major and a lover of Empress Matilda, somebody who historians have unjustly abused. I just love that she knows so much more about history than me, so that when she recommends me a history book, I'm definitely going to learn stuff from it. When I started watching Charlotte, she was reading a lot of contemporaries, classics, historical fiction, and she still does that. But recently she's been reading more and more romance. Now, I've been trying to look at my reading as more of a whole rather than at individual books. And I've enjoyed a couple of romances recently. They're books that I can really enjoy when I'm tired, when I'm stressed, if I've had a bad night's sleep. And I think they really just add a little bit different to my usual books. They sort of balance everything else nicely. But I have never read a bare shoulders or a bit of leg on the cover trashy romance. And Charlotte is not only giving me a chance to try that, she's actively recommending it. Heidi, my reading life. Heidi is the booktuber who got me to try Ruth Ozeki. She could basically recommend Jack Kerouac and Ayn Rand for the rest of her booktube career, and I would say she gives great recommendations. She's unlikely to recommend those authors. They're trash. Heidi reads very diversely, both in terms of genre and the ethnicity of her authors. A lot of non-fiction and nature writing, a good amount of feminist literature, and some just fun genre fiction as well. I was going to read a completely different book that Heidi recommended, but I left a comment on her video and she said that she thought that I might like Night of the Living Rez. So I have changed my mind because I'm capricious like that. Bob the Bookerer. A girl is a half-formed thing. We're getting to the famous booktubers now. If you've never heard of Bob, I think you can probably guess what sort of fiction he loves based on his channel name. Little do you know that Bob likes all books as long as they either have pages or are in some way electronic. Bob reads a lot of new releases, indie books, and he reads a lot of book prizes, because book prizes are the most enjoyable way to be disappointed and remain sober. Bob is incredibly good at appreciating a book for what it is trying to do and not what he wants the book to do, which makes me feel both petty and ill-adjusted. Thanks, Bob. I really enjoy Bob's sense of humour, and I've said it previously, I think he does some of the best reviews on BookTube. Smirty, Sant reads. If I were asked to pick a booktuber who must then get drunk and review their least favourite book, Smirty. If I were asked to pick a booktuber to get high on laughing gas with, Smirty. She's hilarious, she's fabulous, she has a big personality, and the books she loves, she really loves. But the books she hates, she really hates. I really enjoy watching her get tongue-tied, say the wrong thing while filming, and then take the piss out of herself, make everybody laugh, and quickly move on. But books. Books, I hear you say. Yes, she's incredible at them too. But if you're not watching her for her amazing personality, you have bad taste in people. Fantasy, thrillers, contemporary, literary, sci-fi, memoir, translated, and a few other things. Like lots of them. Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. Sea of Tranquility. Marissa is somebody who I've known existed for a while, but I've actually only just started watching her last October, and I'm really upset that I didn't start watching her earlier. She's thoughtful and thought-provoking. She reads classics, historical fiction, and genre-bendy fiction. I really like that she engages with books both cerebrally and hedonistically. She is somebody I could listen to talk about a single aspect of a book for hours. She's just so good at that. Now, I know with this book, I should read Emily St. John Mandel's other books first, but I've been putting off trying Emily St. John Mandel for so long. I'm not procrastinating anymore. I'm getting to this book now, and if I don't get it, if I'm missing pieces, I know I need to try one of her other books. Sean the Book Maniac. Sean is the flamboyant, hilarious, drunk gay man you wish ran the local library cum wine bar near you. I'm pretty sure Sean would run any establishment that combined books and fermented grapes if you're looking for an employee. Sean has very similar taste in books to me, in everything except for the books that we actually enjoy. We both say we love books that emotionally connect us with their characters. We just disagree over which books do that well. So, on the rare cases that Sean and I agree on a book, you know that that book is special. Brian from Bookish. Speaking of booktubers who often have different taste in literature to me, Brian is a closeted Thomas Hardy fan. Please pressure him to read Jude the Obscure in the comment section of his videos. Brian, it's not that sad. Kevy would probably laugh at it. Brian also likes to get where he's going very quickly. That's why he lives in the tiny state of Texas. I really enjoy listening to Brian discuss issues raised in the books that he reads or just in the politics around him at the time. I admire Brian's patience and ability to explain very, very simple things to conservatives. Brian loves authors such as Balzac, Hemingway, Toni Morrison, and Percival Everett, but that's obviously only a small sample. Olivia's Catastrophe, Her Body and Other Parties. If Olivia ever recommends a book to me, I will just read it. She knows her stuff. I also know that if Olivia says a book is sad or about grief and she likes it, I am going to read that book. Last year, I decided to read Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies before it was longlisted for the Booker Prize, based on Olivia's recommendations, and it was one of the best books I read all year. Olivia also enjoys fantasy, Afrofuturism, romance, Shakespeare, Gothic literature, YA, middle grade, and about a dozen other genres I've forgotten exist. If you don't find yourself with a book in common with Olivia, then you're just not trying. Willow, Books and Bow, Solo Dancer. I love the way Willow discusses books. She's so enthusiastic. She clearly loves the books she loves very deeply. She is 99% positive with her reviews, but in the rare case she doesn't like a book, and I'm looking at you, Murakami, she gives brilliant rant reviews too. Seriously, check out her 1Q84 video, it's fantastic. She reads mostly sort of punk gothic translated literature. Solo Dancer interests me because I'd never read a book translated from Taiwanese before. Katie, Books and Things, Briefly a Delicious Life. I feel like you should all know Katie. If there's a booktuber who is required viewing for all of booktube, surely it's Katie. Katie is the queen of classics. She reads a lot of historical fiction and genre-friendly fiction, some Japanese fiction, and just a sprinkling of like gold dust or something. Eric Carl Anderson, Bolla. I feel like these last few booktubers I've been shouting out is almost silly, but when I go into my YouTube studio and it shows me what channel my viewers watch, Eric is always top of that list. Surely you already know him. The stats say you do. For the benefit of the few of you who haven't been lucky enough to find his channel, Eric gives intelligent reviews of new releases, literary fiction, the Woman's Prize, the Booker Prize, LGBT novels, and the occasional translated novel. Eric doesn't often show his humorous side when making videos, but when he does, I always adore it. Jen Campbell, Elena Knows. My wife Nell says that Jen is the most intelligent person on BookTube. Now, I think intelligence is like that perspective thing that when you're a long way off, everybody sort of blurs together, so I'll just take Nell's word for it. Jen is so good at picking up when a book has been influenced by another book, so you could be watching her talk about just one book and get 5 or 6 completely unexpected recommendations thrown into her videos. Nobody discusses books quite like Jen on BookTube. She's unique and brilliant. That's all 27 booktubers. Are you ready to talk about the books? I'm going to go through these books from the worst book to the best book, in my opinion. I've read a lot of books. Of course, some of these books I'm not going to have liked very much. I just want to say that if I didn't like a book, it doesn't mean that booktuber's recommendations aren't brilliant. Lots of these books were recommended by multiple booktubers, so you know it could just be me. And maybe you want to check out what that booktuber said about these books in their best of video instead of listening to me if you're going to take them off your TBR. Let's start with the 3 books I DNF'd. Check out 19, Claire-Louise Bennett. This is the bookish version of health food. Craving something sweet? Eat not chocolate. It looks like chocolate, but it's really probiotics, kale, and fish liver oil. Actually, no, that's a bad recommendation. Imagine going to a really expensive restaurant, eating a degustation menu where everything is foam served on like sand or dirt or some kind of nature scenery reconstructed that isn't actually edible but looks pretty. That's this book. I kind of think stream of consciousness writing needs to be well done. If an author just writes whatever comes into their head, they need to go back and edit it, make sure it makes sense, make sure it adequately communicates the emotions and the experiences that the author intends. If the author is not intending to communicate emotions, but rather ideas and thoughts, then I'm not really sure why you would ever pick stream of consciousness as your medium to do that. This really just felt like disconnected, half-formed thoughts on a page. And when you take away the structure from your writing, like Bennett intentionally does here, you really remove anything the reader has to ground this onto something, and it just becomes nonsense. Look, I like what this book is trying to do, but I hate how it's doing it. Claire-Louise Bennett is clearly a very talented author, but I kind of feel like I've gone to a bookshop, with a list of classics, and I've left with a panda, which is awesome, but not what I went in there for. I recommend this for people who wish James Joyce was a feminist and writing today, which I guess is really high praise, but I'm not interested in James Joyce, I'm sorry. Lonesome Dove. I know, the last one probably upset people, but this one will upset everybody else. But what's the go with this book, people? Which characters am I meant to be supporting? I couldn't bring myself to like any of them, and I didn't truly hate anybody either. I just really didn't care what happened to any of them. And it's just so long. It's almost 1,000 pages. Once I got an average length book into this chunker, it didn't interest me. I just gave up. Also, I kind of get that the author is intending for the descriptions of the West to be very accurate and warts and all, and I get that that is going to include racism and misogyny, but I got bored waiting for the author to do something with it, to say something with it. It was just like there, normalizing the unacceptable behavior, and I was waiting for something, a comment, which maybe came later in the novel, but oh my god, it was just so long. Little foxes took up matches. Katia Kazbek. This book was just too weird for me. I'm sorry, I wanted to like it. A trans coming of age novel, horrible trauma, coping with that trauma, mental health, misgendering, a great depiction of dysphoria. That literally involved Mitra, the main character, eating their own body for substance. But you can see from that last description that things were getting a bit weird. It just had lots of magical realism, and I really hate magical realism. Fantasy is fine, but magical realism is a blight on literature. Oh. Quite impressively, I got halfway through this book. I will literally DNF a magical realism book before the first sentence is over. Such is the depth of my hatred towards that horrible genre. If, unlike me, you don't hate magical realism and you enjoy emotionally devastating literature, then I suspect that this might be a really brilliant book for you. The DNFs are over. Now, I have two books that just didn't really work for me, I'm sorry. Morgan Tolte's Night of the Living Res just didn't work for me. I want to say I don't get it, but I don't actually even understand what it is I need to ask. And that's the problem. Part of this book is about race and being Indigenous. Part of this book is about a grandmother who is suffering from Alzheimer's and getting her grandson mixed up with her other grandson who is dead, and then punishing him for past missteps. And then there's clearly intergenerational trauma and trust issues of the police involved. I think what this book is trying to do is frame dementia as some sort of the dead are really alive, nobody trusts each other, and having some sort of slow building tension that leans into horror. But if this book is intended to be horror, then I'm missing it completely. I'm not connecting with the horror themes. If it's intended to be a domestic drama, then that doesn't work for me either. Either this book is truly not doing a lot, or I've completely missed most of this book. I'm really leaning towards that last one. I don't understand what I should have been looking for. The other book that didn't work for me is Black Mamba Boy by Nadifa Mohamed. I'm not really a fan of Nadifa Mohamed's prose. She really, really fundamentally failed to connect me with Jama, the protagonist. This is a historical fiction set in Somalia in the 1930s, a decade that included a lot of war in Africa as well as in Europe. Jama is looking for his father, and it's a journey that allows Nadifa Mohamed to show us the cruelty of war, not just Somalia, but Eritrea, Sudan, Djibouti, Egypt. She can discuss refugees, war crimes, the very hard-hitting and horrible stuff, dehumanizing ways to kill people. And that's before she introduces Jewish characters and their treatment by the Germans. I kind of think that this book would have been better if it was twice as long. I just felt like I got a sample of everything, but that I didn't get to spend enough time anywhere to really like sit with it and understand it. I feel like Jama moves too quickly, but ultimately I just didn't understand him at all by the end of the novel. I had a similar issue with The Fortune Men, but everything just clicked at some point, and I was really waiting for that to happen with this book. If this was my first time reading Nadifa Mohamed, I would have DNF'd it. Good things that there are a lot of historical facts here, which gives the reader a chance to learn quite a lot about Somalia and about northeastern Africa in general during the 1930s. This next category is for books that had elements that I enjoyed and elements that I didn't enjoy. It's a bit mixed. I don't want to say that this is the meh category. They don't feel like 3-star reads to me, because the absolute truth is that none of these books are plain. None of these books are average. All of these books have done things excellently. They could have very easily been a 5-star read, but they've also done things that I didn't like, that didn't work for me, or for whatever reason I just didn't get along with. So I guess equally they could be a 1-star read for you. So essentially I recommend every book on this list, but there's a caveat for some of them, and some of those caveats are much bigger than others. Also, we are going from the book that I least enjoyed to the book that I most enjoyed, and there is a bit of a gap between the first and the last one in here. A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing by Eimear McBride. This is super experimentally written stream of consciousness, which I've already expressed my reservations with. This is a book about sex, coming of age, sexual assault, sexual judgment, sexual power, gratification, age gap, rape, things that we say that aren't rape but that actually are rape, sluttiness, conservative Irish religious views of women's sexuality, toxic masculinity, being a girl or being a young woman growing up and transitioning between the two, discovering one's own sexuality. You can see that this is an incredibly powerful novel. This would have been a great book if it was just written sparsely with just simple or lovely prose. But I think the stream of consciousness writing actually could have really worked and really elevated this work to the right reader. I'm just not sure McBride pulled it off. And if she did pull it off, I think that this would have been absolutely amazing. And maybe that's why this book is so polarizing out there with reviewers. So many people love or hate this book, because it's either going to be that book that works for you and you just say wow, or you just like no. The Anomaly, Harvey Letellier. A plane lands. 3 months later, it lands again with the same passengers, the same faults, the very same stains on the carpet that need cleaning. Among the passengers, there is a terminally ill author, a hitman, a Nigerian pop star, and all of these people appear to have been cloned. This is not the book I thought it was going to be. I thought that this would be a mystery, but it's not. It's a philosophical book. Lots of discussion about religion and physics. I used to find these sort of books really interesting, but I just don't anymore. I find that discussion so overdone and boring, and it never adds anything to the debate. I didn't hate this book. I actually think that this is an incredibly good book. If you're interested in it, definitely read it. It's just not my sort of novel. Not that I want to insult anything that Ange really likes. After all, I might be called out for being a laird. I think if you liked the latest Cormac McCartney novel, or if you like authors such as Kafka or Camus, you'll love this. Animal, Lisa Taddeo. This is a feminist novel that explores the role of sex, sexuality, and violence and the effects they play on women, particularly in regards with their relationship to men, but also their relationships with other women. This is the sort of messy novel I adore, but this is not very well executed. I actually suspect that if you're a thriller reader and you want to try literary fiction, this might be a good novel to gently transition. Also, if you're a literary fiction reader that wants to transition into thrillers, I kind of think that this is a good one too. I actually quite like this, but I don't think that many other people will. And I can think of heaps of examples of authors who have done this sort of thing, but better. Such a Fun Age or Melissa Broder. Elena Knows by Claudia Piñeiro. I'm left very confused on this one. I've even messaged two of my besties asking if they'd read this one. This is super popular, and it's the story of Elena. She has Parkinson's disease. Her daughter has hung herself in a church, and Elena knows that she couldn't possibly have done it. She knows that it's murder. And I thought that this was a cozy murder mystery that was also going to talk about disabilities and Parkinson. I thought that this was going to be like a glorious blending of literary fiction and genre fiction, and it's not. I really enjoyed Elena's discussion of the gender of her illness, and so she thinks she should address it as herself. Because when she thinks about it, she thinks fucking whore illness. And whore is a she, not a he. I think this joke actually is a real mini version of what I think about this book, because that joke is funny. I laughed at that joke. I liked it a lot. But it is told at the expense of sex workers, and I didn't really like that. So what I'm about to say, I want you to take with a rather large grain of salt, because I want you to look at who's recommending it. Jen Campbell, she's disabled. She's a massive advocate for people with disabilities. And I also doubt that she's misinterpreted this novel. Also, it was longlisted for the Barbellion Award. So, let's just say that I got it wrong, but I don't understand why. This book is making commentary on a certain political issue, and I love the way that it is doing that. But the way that it is resolved, the way that it ends, that's not disability positive. I actually think it's really damning, negative, and insulting. And I think maybe because it's done on an individual level, that I'm being a bit sensitive to it. Maybe because it's an individual level, it's not a monolith sort of thing. But then I also think that the disability is being used to demonstrate something else. It is a plot device almost, which isn't true for most of the novel. I just find that ending really, really yuck. It really does not sit right with me. So if you've read this book, you understand what I'm talking about, you understand what I'm saying, because I'm obviously trying to not spoil this for anybody who hasn't read it yet. Tell me in the comments what I'm getting wrong, what I'm seeing back to front, or whatever. I would love to have a conversation with you and improve my opinion of this book. I also think that this book probably could have done with being a little bit faster paced. I think it was intentionally slow to demonstrate what it was like for Elena, but I also think because I was expecting this to be a cozy murder mystery with literary merit rather than what it was, I was like, give me a clue, show me a suspect. So I think this book suffered from me having the wrong expectations for it as well, which hopefully now you've watched it, you don't have the same issues. Sea of Tranquility, Emily St. John Mandel. I really struggled with where to put this book on the list because I feel like I could have put it anywhere, to be honest. The way that Mandel builds a world, the way that she writes a story, I really enjoyed that. That was fantastic. I could have done a little bit more character work, but I felt like that's a minor issue. I felt like she was quite close. My issue is, as this got closer and closer to the end of the book, I couldn't see how it was going to end. And then when it did end, I didn't get it. And then after I did get it, it was one of those things, when like somebody tells you a joke and you're like, huh? And then they say, no, actually, the bar is, or whatever, and they explain it to you, and you're like, oh, it's not funny. But the joke, I feel like I lost that magic. Because this book is about time travel, there are a lot of stories happening all over the place, all at once, and the reader has to figure out how to fit them together. And they do link together. They absolutely do link together. But really, I think my issue is, that British game show where you get 6 numbers and you have to combine them in such a way to get another number. Then the contestants are given 30 seconds to do it, and you're playing along at home, and then you look up and there's like 3 seconds left on the clock and you're screaming, just give me another 15 seconds, I can get this. I feel like that was my issue with this book. I feel like I read it too quickly, and I wanted Mandel to pad it out and to give me a few more clues and to hold my hand a bit more, which is really a very complex way of saying I was too stupid for this book. This was my first Emily St. John Mandel, and as I said when I introduced this, maybe I should have read another book first, and I am aware that was a lot of people's recommendations going into this. So if you've read this, 2 questions. Did I just sabotage myself completely? And what's a good book, a good standalone book from Emily St. John Mandel that you absolutely love? Because I weirdly feel at the end of this that I didn't like this book, but I really like this author. A bit of a unique way to feel after having read one book. Solo Dance by Katomi Lee, translated by Arthur Morris. This is a book about a woman living in Taiwan. They are gay. They suffer a traumatic event and they move to Japan to start a new life. Japan is much more homophobic than Taiwan, and she goes from being openly gay to semi-closeted, at least closeted in her professional life. She is suffering from mental health issues relating to the traumatic event, which I won't go into details about, and the inability to live her life openly. She's also suffering from rejection dysphoria and has literally changed her name and her identity and moved countries and is suffering from a lack of identity. On top of this, she is suffering from suicidal ideation. This is a book about mental health. This is a book about being queer. It's about trauma, fitting in, acceptance, home, suicide, migration, and love. This really should be right at the top of the list for me. This is exactly my type of literature. And it's good. The structure, the setup, the plot, the ideas, they're all brilliant. And overall, this is a good book. But I really struggled to connect with the language. I have never read another book translated from Taiwanese. So maybe the language didn't translate in the way that I like. I know from reading other books from sort of East Asia, I know that Korean is my favorite, that I like Japanese more than I like Chinese. I have very different experiences with books from those three languages. So maybe there is something about the way language translates that I liked or didn't like in those countries. Also, maybe I'm just not a fan of the translator. I can't really tell what's going on here, and I think what I probably need to do is read a bunch more Taiwanese novels to figure it out. But overall, I would say that this is quite a good book. I just feel like this was lacking in the complexity and the nuance to make the emotionally devastating scenes pop. They felt so cold and reflective. White and White by Aisha Selva. An art student moves into an apartment to study Gothic nudes. Her landlady, Agnes, is a painter. This book is essentially these two women, their discussion, their views of the other one. And it is packed full of both empathy and cruelty. There's themes of this idea that there's a fine line between success and failure, between security and disaster. This is one of these books where not a lot happens, but that you're exploring a relationship, an emotion, a character. I think that this was really good, but I think it could have been done in half as many pages. It's a pretty short book to begin with, and I just think it would have been better as a novella. Or maybe we could have used a small bit of plot or an additional character to give us a few more perspectives. I just felt like the information was a little bit too spaced out, and if it could have been condensed, it would have made it a much more pleasurable experience. But I had everything I needed to like this book. How High We Go in the Dark. This is interconnected short stories. An archaeologist finds a proto-human preserved in the Arctic, and she's excavating her, defrosting her, and a virus is defrosted at the same time, and she catches it. This is happening because of climate change, by the way. The virus is incredibly deadly. It affects your organs, and you start to grow brain tissue where your heart is, or a lung where your liver is, or something like that. We jump from character to character, and each character is a little further in the future, so we can see how the virus has evolved. We can see society's response to it. Some characters come back in later stories, or minor characters will become protagonists of the next story. And I think that this is a really effective way of telling a story over a long period of time. I've basically only seen people say that they absolutely loved this book, that it's incredible, or that they hated this book, that it's terrible. I have not seen any in-between reviews, and that really surprises me. The lack of people who just moderately enjoyed this book, that surprises me. But really, the real surprise is the hate for this book. I just don't get it. If you are suffering from COVID fatigue, I get it. It's really understandable if you are suffering from COVID fatigue, by the way. And any book with a pandemic as the central theme is going to be terrible. So if that's you and you haven't read this one, maybe wait a couple of years. But this, the themes are great. The criticism of our world is fantastic. I hate capitalism, so it's always good to see that get a bit of criticism. It raises some interesting questions, and I enjoyed that every character was a minority. And all of this sounds like I'm going to tell you how wonderful this book is, because it's wonderful at everything except for the thing that it sucks at. Characters. Sucked is maybe a little bit too strong, but they were just so much weaker than every other aspect of this book. I particularly enjoyed the story with the pigs in it, but coincidentally, the pig was the best drawn character here. Train Dreams by Dennis Johnson. A really lyrical novella. It is very economical and short, and it kind of feel like I can't say much about it because it's so short. I kind of feel like everything is a spoiler. This gave me real John Steinbeck vibes or John Irving vibes. It's very anachronistic. It feels like it was written in the 30s. But it was only written 20 years ago. And yeah, I know that Irving is still writing today and that he never wrote in the 30s, but he himself is a very anachronistic writer. It tells the story of Robert Granier, a man who works and lives along a train line and believes he is suffering from the curse of the Chinaman, a literal man who he literally tries to murder. So we really get this take on racism here. And then that take becomes very metaphorical, which means that you're constantly linking things back together. I thought that was incredibly clever. We get to see 40 years of Granier's life, the way the country treats him, the way the country mistreats him, the way he is exploited, the way things are not fair. And who does he blame? The Chinaman. I like what Dennis Johnson is trying to do here. I like it quite a lot. But I was just getting comfortable with what was happening and it was wrapping up. This is like the exact opposite review of White on White. I feel like maybe I read this wrong. It's only 110 pages long. And I think if you're reading it, just do 10 pages a day maximum and then go on to something else. Sit with it for a while. Give yourself time to reflect. I didn't realize that was what I needed until after I finished it. I think maybe it is lacking a little bit in variety or contrast. I think a second character who occasionally crosses paths with Granier would have added a lot to it. Usually when I read a book, I am saying that the book is too big and it should be cut down. But in this case, the complete opposite. So maybe avoid this book if you're not a fan of short stories. Everybody else, I think, will actually like this book quite a lot. Her Body and Other Parties, Carmen Maria Machado. This is another one that's good for fans of short stories because it's short stories. There are 8 stories and every single one of them is feminist. Quite a few of them are queer. Quite a few of them are about motherhood. A lot of them are about sex or power or sexual power or rape or all of those things. My favourite story was The Husband's Stitch, about a woman who's wearing a green ribbon around her neck and never removes it, and her husband wants nothing more than to remove it from her. It was like a Daphne du Maurier but fantastical portrait of a woman and her relationship with her husband. I think you hear this review almost every time somebody reviews short story collection. Some stories are better than others. And that is absolutely true here. A collection needs to work together. And this is one of the things that is really good about this. All of the stories, they add to the themes. Even the weakest story in this collection adds to the experience. I think bad short story collections are disconnected. I always cringe when I see books that say, the complete short stories of insert author name here. I just don't think that that's how they're intended to be read. What I found difficult was that this book really was essentially light magical realism. You were never quite sure whether you were in the real world or not, and anything could happen. And I really think that a story needs that grounding. It needs to set out the rules of its reality so that as a story you know what is possible. Look, without that it really takes away from my emotional connection, and in relation to this book that is really bizarre, because one thing that this book is actually quite good at is creating that emotional connection, which is a talent in a short story. But then to have something take away from that when you have so precious little time to foster it, really, this book should be absolutely amazing, but it's so close and it's not. If you like very gentle, very literary horror with some feminist themes, or Argentinian literature at the moment, I think that this is a short story collection you would really get along with. Also, a good one for fans of Our Wives Under the Sea. No caveats, no ifs and buts. This next section, these are just solid, good books. I enjoy these books. I recommend them. I'm not going to criticize them. Yeah, I'm still working my way up to my best book, but you should take this as a sign of how many exceptional books there are in this list. Briefly, A Delicious Life, Nell Stevens. This is really the story of French author Georges Sand, who, if you don't know, was super queer and caused a bit of a stir in Mallorca. But it's told from the point of view of a 14-year-old girl who is also a 400-year-old ghost, I think is a really cool way to add to this story. Because George Sand is a historical figure who lived a really interesting and real life, and you could like look up the details and write a story about it. But by adding this ghost element to it, you just add this extra depth to it, and it's really clever. It allows Stevens to highlight the themes she wants to highlight. I think Blanca the Ghost, which, by the way, what a fantastic name for a ghost. I think she has the better story, which, you know, I would have to assume is the one that's completely made up, which makes me think that Stevens is probably writing a little bit within herself, which is quite incredible. I think I might have liked this book even more if I had have read some George Sand beforehand. She's an author that I haven't got to yet. I suspect I will later this year at some point thanks to this novel. But I just feel like maybe Stevens included a few references that went straight over my head. It didn't affect my ability to enjoy the novel at all. But, you know, when you're missing Easter eggs, you want to get every bit of joy you can squeeze from a novel possible, don't you? A powerful queer story, a powerful feminist story. It's quite fun and it's quite moving at the same time. Actually, one of Stevens' absolute gifts is to be able to include a lot of absolutely brutal stuff without either hitting you hard with the sads or losing that impact. She's able to maintain that pacey, fun feel to it. When a Scot ties the knot, Tessa Dare. Who would have expected this one to be so high up the list? But it was just the perfect balm. I had to do some moving of some stuff, some heavy lifting, and it was hot and it was a very hard day's work. And the next day I was really tired, and this was a brilliant book to read that day. We start with a typically problematic romance storyline, and from there the author has to somehow make you believe that the characters actually like each other, let alone fall in love. Madeline Gracechurch is a young lady. She's about to make her debut and hopefully find a husband, but ideally she doesn't want to do any of that. So to keep her family happy, she invents a husband, Captain Logan Mackenzie, a Scottish soldier who, after marrying her, immediately leaves to do whatever it is soldiers do when they're not around their wives. I assume that's murder other men who are avoiding their wives too. Madeline continues to write letters to this fake captain. Somewhere along the line, she inherits a castle in Scotland, as you do. And then one day, who should knock on the door but Captain Logan Mackenzie, who is rather less imaginary than Maddie first thought. He says, "Marry me for real, or I'll tell everybody that you're a lying fake." She basically says, "Yes, blackmail me and I will fall in love with you and everything will be happily ever after." I mean, stuff happens along the way. The premise of this book is just so stupid. I'm really impressed that Tessa Dare is able to make it work. But her characters are just so damn likeable. I'm not even put off by the castle ownership or the murdering of people in another country. They're really likeable and really horny. It is so easy to ship this couple. I was listening to this on audiobook and I went down to the shops to get something, groceries or whatever. And look, I'm really antisocial. I will often audiobook at the supermarket because who am I going to talk to at the supermarket? And that happens to be my location when I read the first steamy scene in this book. And yeah, it made me blush. Wow. I was not expecting that level of detail. I mean, it's not something that's new to me, but I didn't think it would be in this book. So I'm starting to think that maybe romance is a thing that I really, really enjoy. It's got everything I get out of that messy girl literary fiction, but it's just uncomplicated, it's simple, and it's easily digested. Light from Uncommon Stars, Rika Aoki. Speaking of romances I can get behind, The Queen of Hell, and a single mother who is really an undercover alien running a donut shop. Yeah, I can get behind that. But that is a side plot to this novel. This is really about a trans violin player who runs away from home and wants to make computer game music. She is making money as a sex worker. She meets the Queen of Hell, who happens to be a killer violin player and also under contract with Hell to deliver 7 souls in 49 years, a time frame that she is rapidly coming to the end of. This is like a much more adult TJ Klune. It has all the warm, fuzzy, and fun. It felt really low stakes, but actually there are some really big issues in here around acceptance, around family, around trans dysphoria, fear of rejection, and of course, donuts. This book is not my perfect book, but what this book wanted to be, it did that perfectly. And while we're calling this book perfect for various things, it is the perfect change of pace book. It's very similar to Tessa Dare. I really just enjoyed this fun little romp. Bolla, Pajtim, Statovci. I've been talking about these fun novels, and now I get to this one. This novel is a lot of great things. Fun is not one of them. Translated from the Finnish, Pajtim Stanovic is a Serbian-Finnish author, and he has set this novel in Serbia around the war. Arsim is recently married when he meets Milos, a man he will fall in love with. 2 weeks later, Arsim's wife is pregnant. I found the misogyny and Arsim's treatment of his wife really uncomfortable. But I think that this adds to it. I think it adds to it a lot. It demonstrates that homophobia hurts women. It allows a novel that is essentially centering two men to be feminist. It certainly doesn't place Arsim in a positive light. He was a character I disliked intensely, and not just for his treatment of his wife, but he does some other pretty horrible stuff in it. He's just very toxic and does not take responsibility for anything. And I think it's a real triumph of this book that it made me empathize with such an unlikable and flawed character. It made me feel sorry for him even though I hated him. There is a lot in this novel. The effects of war, poverty, migration, homophobia, illness, depression, paedophilia, mythology, prison, marriage, violence. This is a relentlessly depressing novel that doesn't shy away from the darkest parts of life. Indelicacy, Amamina Kane. I am very, very impressed with Amamina Kane's prose. This book is so feminist. A woman is working as a cleaner in a museum of art. She wants more from her life. She wants to write. And through marriage, she doesn't need to work anymore. She can write. But her husband doesn't want her to write. And she's really uncomfortable about hiring a cleaner. This is a book about class, about desire, about art, about the importance of art, about anxiety, about sexuality, about centering a woman's sexuality in a heterosexual relationship. And it is deeply, deeply feminist, very slow, very ambient, very beautiful, and very moving. Disoriental, Négar, Djavadi, translated by Tina A. Kover. This book has a really interesting and surprising and horrifying fact that really supports the story. In Iran, a country where being gay is punishable by death, being transgendered is legal. An Irani family flees Iran for France. Kimi is 10 when that happens. She's now 25. She's in a fertility clinic. She doesn't know if she's Irani or French. She may or may not be queer, and she's thinking back on her life to date and the life of her family. This is a book about identity and family. It includes many, many key moments in the history of Iran. I learned quite a bit about Irani culture and history. This is a very literary historical fiction. Interesting blend of two micro-genres. And I really liked the French-Irani conflict in this book. We get a lot of books about being Asian or Arabic or black and living in the US or the UK. And it's nice to see that cultural conflict from a different angle. I think that this is a brilliant book that can be enjoyed in different ways by different readers. The sun's just been creeping into the shot, so I just thought I'd move before it got ridiculous. Another Country by James Baldwin. When I think about Baldwin, there is Giovanni's Room, a fantastic novel about being gay, and there is If Beale Street Could Talk, a fantastic novel about being black. Another Country is both of these things. It is the most ambitious James Baldwin novel I've read so far, but I think it maybe falls ever so slightly short of the other two Baldwin books I have named. Now, there's no shame in that. This is still a fantastic novel. If you were the third richest person alive, you would be pretty happy with your wealth. And being the third best Baldwin book still means you're a great book. Baldwin is looking at liberal America, and he is showcasing their best and worst traits next to each other. I thought it was a really effective way of both calling people out and complimenting them at the same time. There's lots of cheating, lots of bisexuality. It's about art, sexuality, suicide, love and acceptance, of course, race. This book is just a wonderful portrait of a complex web of friendship and emotions. It is one of these books that I just would have been very happy just to keep reading and reading. I wish that it would never end. Baldwin's just a nice writer, isn't he? He's just a good writer. If he wrote infinite books, you could just happily read him forever without changing author. If you've been keeping count, there are 5 books left, and this is the last category, and I'm just going to call this category Wow. Carol or The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith. Therese is working in a department store when Carol comes in, and the two women are drawn to each other. Carol is older than Therese. She is in the process of getting divorced, and she is worried about the custody of her child. The two women are sort of unlikely friends and slowly fall in love, even though they may be not the most suited. But soon Carol notices somebody following her. This is the sort of book where I was reading it and I thought, oh, I like this. And then a little bit later I was like, ooh, I like this a lot. The more I read, the better this book got. And I think even after I finished this book and I've sat with it, the better this book has got. The character portraits in this book were nothing short of brilliant. There were a few things that happened and I thought, what? Why would anybody do this? And then I thought, no, Therese is actually exactly the character who would act like that. This really makes sense. This was a lesbian romance, but it was really calling out the desire of men to control women. I thought that this was a wonderfully intelligent novel that was so easy to get lost in and enjoy. This is absolutely brilliant. The Wife. An aging couple is on a flight from the US to Finland. Told from the point of view of the wife, we learn in the opening scene that she has decided to leave her husband. A deceptively simple novel about an author who is nominated for a book prize and the woman behind him and the history of their relationship. This was fantastic storytelling. It was deeply feminist and a fantastic portrait of this woman. And because there are so many flashbacks and we're seeing this relationship evolve over 30 or 40 years, we're seeing it in its entirety. We get to see this wonderful character growth and we get to see these characters grow apart. I thought it was clever. I thought it was satisfying. So feminist. I just wouldn't change a thing. 3 books to go. Is anybody else imagining the booktubers responsible for these last 3 books, waiting in suspense, thinking, oh, there's only 3 left. Maybe my book actually won. Maybe it was the best read. Well, two of them are about to get very, very nervous. The 5 Wounds. Kristen Valdez Quaid. We start with Amadeo, an unemployed man in his 30s who is about to be crucified as part of an Easter celebration. Yeah, that's apparently a thing. His 15-year-old daughter Angel has just turned up after a fight with her mother and her stepfather. She's just announced to them that she's pregnant. But Angel doesn't want to live with her father. It's her grandmother she's looking for. She owns the house that Amadeo lives in after all. But Yolanda is away on a holiday with her boyfriend, who she has just broken up with after she's found out that she is terminally ill. This is an emotional novel. It's tender. It's often funny. A story of a family who are about to grow by one and shrink by one. There's issues of race and class. It's very feminist. The role of women is really examined. There are perceptions and expectations of being a stuffer. There is a queer romance and so much about class in this book, actually. Really, really good at that exploration. And to be honest, this is just one hell of a good book. It delivers on everything it promises. First-class storytelling, brilliant characters, engaging plot. It takes you through all the emotions of life. It was interesting from start to end, and it just got better and better. I cannot see anybody not enjoying this book. Brilliant. At certain points we touch. Lauren, John, Joseph. A trans woman is looking back on her first love, a relationship she had with a man a decade ago before she transitioned. This was just so complex. It was brilliant. Thomas James, the man, was far from a perfect man. He was self-centered, he was toxic, he was sexist, he was egocentric and selfish, and I thought the exploration of femininity in gay culture, the prejudice against femme men and trans women, and everything within the gay community was just brilliant. It was handled with so much nuance, especially because our narrator was very young and was figuring things out for themselves. This was an issue I knew existed, but I just didn't know much about it, and I think it was really wonderful to learn more. And this might sound like this book was great because this was a new issue for me to read about, but let me assure you that it is done absolutely brilliantly, and that there are many other issues explored in this novel: friendship, found family, money, art, entertainment, power, grief, legacy, and I think it needs to be said again, art and entertainment. Thomas James is a photographer. Our narrator is an author who also performs drag. We look at how art is inspired by their relationship, how artists view the world, and it is a wonderful silver lining to this solid gold novel. And I haven't said it yet, the gorgeous, gorgeous writing to complement the absolutely wonderful character portrait. Holy shit, this is a good book. I would not be surprised if Magma is my book of the year. A young university student falls in love with an intelligent young man. He quotes Latin. He is a vegetarian. He is beautiful. And Lilia is desperately in love. Despite Lilia being in love, it is very clear the feelings are not entirely reciprocated. But she thinks he just needs time. And she asks herself, would he love her if she just let him do anal? What if she was better? What if she was just better to him? Would he be with her right now instead of with the redhead? She's probably completely hairless. Lilia has absolutely no self-worth, no self-esteem, and she's soon to begin self-harming. Told in super, super short chapters. Some of them are literally only 2 lines long. The prose is absolutely fantastic. You can tell that this author is a poet. The character portrait is sublimely intimate. We can see just how brilliant Lilia is, and we can see why she doesn't think she's good enough. At the same time, it is so easy to invest in her, to like her, and to let our author torture her. Oh, if Thomas Hardy was only an Icelandic woman, he would have written this book. Actually, there is no way Thomas Hardy could be succinct and minimalist enough. This is beautiful. This is emotionally devastating, and it is so not for most of you. And I suspect that you know if you're not going to like this book. But for those of you who are dead inside and want to have emotional torture branded into the center of your soul, this is exactly what you want. This is niche perfect. This was so feminist, so beautiful, so intimate. I just love this one. I mean, obviously, for all you stats nerds out there, I will put some stats up on the end screen, but this is very clearly an overall successful little experiment. It always is. And I really recommend that you do this little reading experiment for yourself. It's always good. If this video wasn't long enough for you, why don't you click over here and see me do this with 6 other fantastic booktubers who didn't get to feature in this incredible list.
Can you feel the fire?